Hi YouTube, it's Kathy and this is my March 2025 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything or go back to anything, all of that is down in the description below. On the way down with the description, make sure that you're subscribed because sometimes YouTube likes to unsubscribe people, and that's just fun. And also, if it's worth it, maybe hit the like button, maybe share this with a friend, you do you. As a reminder, I'll be updating my bingo board from hell as well as Read Queer all year at the end of the video, so stick around for that. In March, I read 15 things for a total of 4,764 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so about 2,377 of those pages were actually about 66 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 10 adult books, 4 YA books, and 1 middle grade book. I read 12 novels, 2 anthologies, and 1 novella. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was historical fiction and mystery thriller, followed by fantasy, nonfiction, sci-fi, and horror. If you adjust by page count, not too much changes. Most of these were from the library, but I did read 1 I owned and another I borrowed. I read 7 audiobooks, 4 hardcovers, 3 paperbacks, and 1 ebook. The biggest chunk of these books were in the 200 to 499 page range, and the majority were published this decade. I read a decent mix of authors in terms of gender, and nearly half of the protagonists were women. In terms of setting, nearly half were set in the US, but I also had reads set in other worlds, the UK, Russia, Ireland, and France. In terms of diversity of subject matter, the biggest chunk was intersectional, but I also read books to do with disability, race, queer characters, and some books with no discernible diversity. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 2-star read, 2 3-star reads, 2 3.5-star reads, 5 4-star reads, 2 4.5-star reads, and 3 5-star reads. Let's start with our lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? Coming in at 2 stars this month is A Country for Dying. This is a translated book that I was really looking forward to but didn't work for me personally. There was just something about the writing of this and the fact that there wasn't really a plot that was cohesive and interesting and engaging enough, not to mention there were characters that were dead named. I just didn't really see the point of this story, and that's why I didn't really like it. That being said, this book is loosely based around this woman who grew up in Morocco and then is now currently living in Paris, France, as somebody who sells the types of services that YouTube doesn't like you to talk about. In addition to her, we get the perspective of a friend of hers who is a trans woman who is going through some body dysmorphia at this point, so definitely trigger warnings for that. And from there, we just kind of get some side tangents and then also some stories within some stories, and I didn't really come out of this knowing what the author was trying to say, which is why it's rated so lowly for me. On to my 3-star reads, the first one being A Murder in Tinseltown. This one I thought was going to be really fun because it's a choose-your-own adventure that's a murder mystery, which is just kind of cool. And it's set in the 50s in Hollywood, and there's this starlet who's been murdered and you're trying to figure out who done it. And all of that setup is really cool. I just don't think it was actually executed all that well. For example, I'd go through and it'd be like, turn to this page if you want to do this thing, or this page if you want to do the other thing, you know, the classic choose-your-own adventure. But if I picked something, sometimes what I was actually doing wasn't what I thought I would be doing if I turned to that page, which I found annoying. Also, there were points where I was just looping back to the same things that I had already done, so I'm like, oh, so this thing's gonna explode 3 times. That doesn't make any sense to me. There were just little things where the timings of different characters and where they were and what they were doing weren't really matching up. And for all I know, the Choose Your Own Adventure books when I was a kid were full of plot holes like this, but I didn't notice them then, and now I'm noticing them in this book, which is meant for adults. Also, there were just a couple of little vocabulary things that threw me off, and I was not surprised to find out when I finished it that this was written in the UK, because there were certain terms that I was like, you wouldn't use that term for that item in Hollywood, and that's because a UK author was using a word like lift instead of elevator. It didn't really detract from my enjoyment because like I understood what they were talking about, but it did kind of niggle in my brain going, that's not the right word for the context. My next 3-star read was A Million to One. This is a historical fiction that takes place in Dublin leading up to the sailing of the Titanic. Essentially, we have these 4 female characters who are coming together because they are going to perform a heist on the Titanic. They've learned that this very specific gigantic, very expensive book that's basically jewel encrusted is going to be transferred across the Atlantic on the Titanic, and they want to steal it because all of those jewels are worth a lot of money. However, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that the Titanic didn't make it all the way across the Atlantic, so that is definitely something they have to contend with near the end of this book. But this book does a really good job of making you forget that that's going to be a problem they're going to face as they're trying to figure out the different facets of this heist. I really like that we got to know these 4 different characters, their motivations for being there, their backgrounds, and all of those types of things, and it was just interesting to try to see if anyone was going to make it out of this alive. On to my 3.5 star reads, and the first one is Die For Me, which is the 3rd in the Killing Eve series, and I read the 2nd and the 3rd this month, so I kind of want to talk about them together. I did give the 2nd book 4 stars and this one 3.5 stars, so I kind of want to talk about them both right now because I can't really say too much because they're both sequels, but also that's going to throw off my list and my chapter markers. So the interesting thing about the 3rd book is the other 2 books were in 3rd person, and this is in 1st person, specifically from Eve's perspective. And I think this was done very purposely because there's some kind of misdirection that happens near the end of the book where Eve wouldn't know certain things, therefore the author doesn't want the audience to know certain things, so I liked that part of it. Also, as in most cases, the book and the show, very, very different. If I had to pick, I'd obviously say I enjoy the show more because, like, you've got Sandra Oh, and Julie Comer did an amazing job in her role. You got to see a lot more of these locations, and that was just very cool. My other 3.5 star read this month was I Am Made of Death. This one is about this girl named Vivian, and she has a demon inside of her, as we all do, except for hers will specifically hurt people if she talks out loud. So since the age of 4, when she acquired this demon, she has kind of cobbled together a different way of communicating with other people, which is mostly sign language, and if other people don't sign, then she'll write things down. Her stepfather, who often uses her specific talents for his own evil bidding, has recently employed her a new interpreter, and that's Thomas. We actually get both of their perspectives throughout this book. He really needs this job, 1, because it pays really, really well, and 2, because his mother is disabled and his little sister is still in high school and he just wants to provide for them. However, Vivian doesn't want basically a babysitter, even though they're basically the same age. So she spends the whole summer trying to get him to quit. He spends the whole summer being like, I'm not gonna do that, and also they kind of fall for each other. And this whole time, unbeknownst to him, because she doesn't want him to know, she is trying to do this kind of back alley exorcism. It gets dark, it gets creepy. It was a fun enough time. I wasn't raving about it by the end of it, but I enjoyed my experience reading it. On to my 4-star reads, where we're going to hop back into the Killing Eve series and the 2nd book in this series, which is the 1st book where the characters actually interact with each other. As it turns out, and as you find out in the 2nd book, one of the characters had actually been in the same room as another character while she was sleeping and kind of was being real creepy about it, but you don't actually know that happened until this 2nd book. These books are really fun because spy things, but then you also have this weird dynamic between the 2 main characters. And because I knew it was going to be different from the show, I was just really interested to see how it was going to be different. On to my next 4-star read, and that was The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan, which is the first in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. I actually got to buddy read this with my best friend because she came to me being like, can you keep me accountable? I want to read all of the books in this series, but often I'll get like 4 books in and then get distracted and go on to do something else, so please keep me responsible for actually doing this goal that I have. And I'm like, I can do you one better. I can read the first one with you because I need to read it anyway for a TBR that I have going. And she's like, perfect. So we spent a lot of time doing voice notes back and forth over like the day and a half where we were reading this book, and it was a good time. We didn't love everything about this book, but it was a fun adventure book. If you're not familiar, somehow this book came out 20 years ago, and it's about this kid named Percy Jackson who keeps getting kicked out of these different schools for behavioral issues that really just boil down to being dyslexic and having ADD. But also on the more fantasy side, there are other things at play, so weird things happen around him that he ends up getting blamed for, which is usually why he's kicked out of these places. He finds out that his father is more legendary than he thought and ends up going to this summer camp for people who also have legendary mothers or fathers and then mortal mothers or fathers. And he's sent on a quest because what 12-year-old doesn't get a quest to go all the way across the country for some reason? It's a fun entry to a series. I did enjoy my time with it, and I will be continuing the series, although not at the same pace as my best friend because I have other things to read, but I do have a hold on the 2nd book. Another audiobook I enjoyed this month is The Fire Next Time. This is a very short audiobook. It's about 2 hours from James Baldwin, and I think it has 2 to 3 different essays in it, the major one being The Fire Next Time. This is essentially him just just talking about his time growing up as a black man in the United States and what that entails, and weirdly enough, people want to ban it for that reason. Also, very special for me in particular, the audiobook is narrated by Jesse L. Martin, who I adore. I know him primarily from Rent, and also there have been whisperings about him being the lead in a biopic about Marvin Gaye for like 2 decades now, and that hasn't happened. But now that I know a little bit more about his life, I can kind of see why the family maybe doesn't want it to happen. But I would be totally down with him being the lead in that movie. The next book on my list concludes a duology, and that's Celestial Monsters. This is the follow-up to the Sun Bear trial, so being the second in a series, I can't really tell you too much because I'm definitely not going to tell you what happened at the end of the first book because spoilers, and I won't tell you how this book ended because spoilers. But if you don't know about the Sun Bear trials, this is set in a world where I think it's every 10 years the children of gods need to get together to do basically a big competition to see who is going to have to sacrifice somebody else to the sun god. Our main character, Tio, thinks that he's not going to be picked for something like this because he's a jade, which, if I'm remembering correctly, means that he has one mortal parent and one god parent. However, the sun god can kind of do whatever they want, and they actually do pick Tio to compete in this competition, and that causes some issues because he's thrown back in with these other people that he hasn't seen in a while, and these people that have actually literally been training for this their whole lives. So that's an issue. But of course, that is definitely not the only issue that comes up in this book, and now we are into the second half of it, and this came up with a lot of different things that I found so fascinating. There was this other civilization that is located at some point, and just the sustainability of this small civilization that was living without gods being around, I found really, really cool, and I would actually love a spin-off series all about that location. So I very much enjoyed my time with this. Finally, for my 4-star reads, we have another start to another series, and that's the Apollo Murders. This one takes place in the 1970s, and it has to do with these astronauts who are going into space for what's going to be the last Apollo mission, and some murders that take place. Obviously, you can tell from the title of the book. We get a few different perspectives in this, but our main character is Kaz, and he is a fighter pilot, and we see about 5 years previously to the timeline that we're primarily following that he was actually doing a test flight for a plane as something went wrong, and he ended up being injured in a way that made it so that he could no longer become an astronaut, but he is still able to fly, and he is still able to consult with the military and other entities, so he is still doing that. And he is brought on to do some logistics to do with this final Apollo mission. This is around the time frame where the USSR is trying to do things and the America is trying to do things, and there's sabotage back and forth, and that definitely comes to play in this book, and I won't tell you anymore. What I will tell you is the fact that this is written by an actual astronaut means that there's all these technical things that he's saying, and I'm like, I just completely believe that you know what you're talking about when you're talking about these different flying maneuvers or these different jets or these different planes or all of these types of things. And it's just so cool to be reading a book written by somebody who's actually been up there. One of my 4.5-star reads, the first one being A Grim Reaper's Guide to Catching a Killer. The main character in this one is 42 years old. Her name is Kathy. She is getting a divorce from her ex-husband because she feels that she can't actually be truthful with him because she's not allowed to tell him that she's a Grim Reaper. She's got some other things going on in her personal life that I won't spoil for you, and she goes to pick up a spirit one day, and the spirit isn't where it should be, even though the body is there, which has never happened before. And this is a big problem because if that spirit is not processed in the next 45 days, it will become a ghost. However, when she does locate the spirit, it is the soul of a teenage boy, and he is adamant that somebody from her company actually murdered him, which does not jive with the records that she has that this was a natural death. Now she's got to figure all this out on top of her personal life stuff. I really, really loved this, and it's the beginning of a series, but it's a series that just started, so I'm just like, when is the next book coming out? Because I want to know what else is going to happen with this character. And it's not just because we have the same name. That's actually weird for me. If you're listening to an audiobook and it sounds like the audiobook is constantly talking to you, being like, hey Kath, how's it going? And I'm just like, I don't know you, please don't talk to me. And I'm sure that's happened with some other people, and my best friend likes to tell me I cannot relate to that because her name is Taryn, and I just tell her not to read the Aaron Folk series or whatever the Holly Black series series is, because there is a novella where Taryn is the protagonist, and in the other books she is a side character, so the name would come up quite often. Finally, from our 4.5 star books, we have Bitter, which is the prequel to Pet, and I just really loved this one. In Pet, our main character was named Jam, and her mother is Bitter, so we're seeing Bitter when she was a teenager and living at this place called Eucalyptus, which is a school for people who don't have another place to be, but also are artistically inclined. She has a whole period of her childhood that she has completely blanked out because of trauma, and in the place where she lives, there is a lot of civil unrest because there's a lot of corruption going on, and there are a lot of people around her age that are trying to fight against that, and sometimes the police end up ending their lives. So she has so much trauma about that, and she is extremely scared to go out there and actually do activist things. And this book has a lot to do with not everyone can be on the front lines at all times forever. That's just not something that everybody is capable of doing. That's not something that anyone really is capable of doing, and we all can do our own parts in these different fights. In addition to that, however, she has this kind of magical ability where if she bleeds on something she creates, these little creatures will actually come out of the paper and be her friends for like a couple of hours, and then they usually just disappear until she creates something during a protest, and it definitely does something differently. If you've read Pet, you actually know a little bit more about this type of creature, and I just found it absolutely fascinating to go back to when this character was a teenager and what her art actually meant. As for my 5-star reads, the first one is The Galaxy and the Ground Within. This is the 4th in the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers, and just like every other book in this series, I absolutely adored it. This one takes place on this planet that is kind of a stop-off location when you're going through these different wormholes to get to different places in the universe. Basically, think of it as a space hostel. One of the most fun things about reading this book is you'll be introduced to characters, and then you'll kind of figure out what they must actually look like, because nobody directly on the page in this book is human, although human characters that you've met in previous books, if you've read the previous books because you don't need to, are humans. So sometimes they will talk about human things and make fun of humans in ways that I think are really, really funny. Essentially what happens is we have these 3 different spaceships that have checked in to stay at this space hostel, if you will, for a few hours before it's their turn to go through the wormhole, and then these satellites go down and they're actually stranded there, which sucks because each of them have places to be for very specific reasons. Suddenly these 3 people and the 2 people that live on the planet basically have to come together to just kind of ride out this storm, and it's just such a wholesome space adventure. I really adore Becky Chambers' writing, and I'm so glad I finally got to this book because I read the other books in the series years ago and didn't do any refreshing coming into this one. So when I would get to a point, I'd be like, oh, I have actually encountered this character before, but forgot because it's been years. Penultimately on this list, we have Invisible Women. This one has to do about data bias, how we're often treated when data is not collected that is gender segregated. I've talked a lot about this recently, both in the video I just put up, which is my weekly wrap up, and then also in the Get to Know My Taste tag. So if you're interested to know more about the statistics that are laid out in this book, I highly recommend checking out that tag because I went on and on and on about this because I really want everyone to read it. It's the recycling truck. It's possibly going to be loud for a little bit because the recycling truck is going by, but I'm going to keep talking. My favorite book that I read this month is When Women Were Dragons. This one takes place in, I want to say, about the 1950s. This one is so interesting because we're primarily following this one girl who, as we meet her, is a child, and she actually ends up growing up into a teenager as the time goes on, but then it's also interspersed with these different news clippings and these different articles and these different pages from a book about mass dragonings, which is when in history massive amount of women have just become dragons. But because it's a women's issue, men don't want to talk about it, so it's happened, and then people are like, that never happened, what are you talking about? We're totally just gonna pretend it never happened. This particularly affects the little girl that we're following because somebody in her family ends up actually becoming a dragon, and that has huge consequences when it comes to her family structure. Additionally, down the line, she's having to deal with way more responsibility than she actually should have at this point, as well as a younger family member who is constantly joking about dragons and wanting to be a dragon, and that's just not socially acceptable. I'm honestly not doing this book justice because it is just so fantastic. It's so layered, the different ways it talks about dragons and dragoning and why women would want to become dragons and what happens in the immediate aftermath of those types of things. It's just such a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. As for the prompts for Read Queer All Year, this is what they look like in March. And as I try to do every month, I did cross off every one of these prompts. For Creative Queers, we have Celestial Monsters because one of the characters really loves baking and cooking, and that gets talked about quite a lot in this, and I just really loved that inclusion to what is essentially a journey story. For trans representation, I could also say Celestial Monsters, but just for kicks, I put A Country for Dying. For sapphic history, we have A Million to One, and for banned book, we have Bitter. And I wonder why places in America are trying to ban this activist book. As for my bingo board from hell, this is what it looks like. I've made a little bit of progress on this, but obviously I'm really far away from getting anything checked off, let alone getting a bingo. I've now read 3 banned books. I've done 1 readathon, and I definitely have one coming up in April. I've read 3 books for my 40 before 40 TBR, and then I just have 1 entry each for reading vlogs, rereads, reading things from book boxes. My book of the month ratio is still 1:1, although I can tell you that is going to change next month because I actually ordered some books. And now I finally have something on my translated list, which again was A Country for Dying. If you want to hear me talk more about these books or other books that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, or you now want to read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!